Baruch Spinoza begins his philosophy from a very unusual place. Most philosophers before him started by asking how humans should live or what knowledge we can trust. Spinoza instead asked a deeper and quieter question. What truly exists? What is reality itself when all confusion is removed? He believed that nearly all human suffering comes from misunderstanding the nature of reality. People imagine themselves separate from the world, separate from nature, and even separate from God. Because of this separation, they feel fear, guilt, hope, jealousy, pride, and constant anxiety about things they cannot control. Spinoza wanted to replace confusion with understanding and emotional turbulence with calm clarity. To understand Spinoza, the listener must slowly let go of one very common belief. The belief that the world is made of many independent things acting freely according to their own will. Spinoza argued that this picture is mistaken. According to him, there's only one true substance in existence. Only one reality that exists by itself and depends on nothing else. Everything that exists is not separate from this reality, but exists within it. He called this single substance God or nature. For Spinoza, these two words meant the same thing. God was not a distant creator watching the universe from outside. God was not a being with intentions, anger, rewards, or punishments. God was the totality of existence itself, the infinite system of reality unfolding according to eternal laws. Every star, every thought, every tree, every human emotion is an expression of this single infinite substance. This idea changes everything. If God and nature are the same, then nothing exists outside reality directing events. There are no supernatural interruptions. Everything happens according to necessity. Just as a triangle must have three sides, the universe unfolds according to its own nature. Events do not happen randomly or because of divine preference. They happen because they could not happen otherwise. Spinoza believed humans resist this idea because they experience themselves as free decision makers. When someone chooses to walk, speak, or act, they feel they could have done something different. But Spinoza argued this feeling comes from ignorance of causes. A person knows their desire, but does not know the chain of events that produced that desire. Just as a stone thrown through the air would believe it flies freely if it were conscious, humans believe they act freely because they do not see the forces shaping their thoughts. This does not mean humans are useless or powerless. Instead, Spinoza believed true freedom comes from understanding necessity. Freedom is not the ability to escape cause and effect. Freedom is understanding why things happen and aligning oneself with reality rather than resisting it. The more a person understands the causes behind emotions and events, the less they are controlled by blind reactions. Spinoza viewed human beings as part of nature, not rulers over it. Humans follow the same laws as rivers, planets, and animals. Thoughts and emotions arise through natural processes. Anger, love, fear, ambition, sadness all follow understandable patterns. Instead of judging emotions as sins or moral failures, Spinoza treated them as phenomena to be understood. At the center of his psychology lies an idea he called conatus. Every being strives to persist in its existence. Everything naturally attempts to continue being what it is. A plant grows towards sunlight. Animals seek survival. Humans pursue what strengthens their existence. This striving is not chosen. It is the essence of each thing. Human desire, therefore, is not evil or irrational by itself. Desire is simply the expression of this striving to exist. Problems arise when desires are guided by inadequate understanding. When people misunderstand what truly benefits them, they become trapped in destructive emotional cycles. Spinoza divided emotions into two broad kinds: passive emotions and active emotions. Passive emotions occur when something outside us determines our state. For example, jealousy arises when external comparison controls self-worth. Fear arises when imagined future events dominate the mind. In these moments, a person is acted upon rather than acting from understanding. Active emotions emerge from knowledge. When a person understands causes clearly, emotions transform. Instead of envy, there may be appreciation. Instead of hatred, there may be comprehension. Understanding converts emotional slavery into emotional strength. Spinoza believed most human suffering comes from passive emotions because people constantly imagine things as good or bad based on personal advantage rather than reality itself. Someone calls an event bad because it harms them or good because it benefits them. But nature itself has no such judgments. Events simply follow necessity. This leads to one of Spinoza's most radical claims. Good and evil are not objective features of the universe. They are human interpretations based on usefulness. Something is called good when it increases our power to exist and act. Something is called bad when it diminishes that power. Moral understanding, therefore, becomes connected to knowledge of what truly strengthens human life. For Spinoza, reason becomes the path toward peace. Reason allows humans to see patterns beyond immediate emotion. When guided by reason, individuals recognize that cooperation benefits survival more than conflict. Hatred weakens both the one who hates and the one who is hated. Understanding others becomes rational rather than merely moral. He believed that when people truly understand human behavior, anger begins to dissolve. Instead of blaming individuals absolutely, one sees the chain of causes that shape them. This does not excuse harmful actions, but replaces emotional rage with intelligent response. Spinoza described the highest human state as intellectual love of God. This does not mean religious worship in the traditional sense. It means understanding reality so deeply that one feels harmony with existence itself. When a person understands that they are a mode of infinite nature, fear of fate decreases. Anxiety about control fades because one recognizes oneself as part of an eternal process. In this understanding, the mind becomes calmer. Death itself loses some of its terror. Spinoza argued that a wise person thinks less about death and more about life understood through reason. Since the human mind participates in the eternal order of nature through understanding, knowledge connects individuals to something lasting beyond temporary experience. Happiness for Spinoza is therefore not pleasure or success. Happiness is clarity, the gradual movement from confusion toward understanding, from emotional reaction toward rational insight, from feeling separate from the world toward recognizing unity with it. Most people live driven by imagination, reacting to praise, blame, hope, and fear. The philosopher learns to observe emotions as natural events. This observation weakens their destructive power. Knowledge becomes liberation. Spinoza's philosophy asks the listener to reconsider identity itself. Instead of seeing oneself as an isolated self struggling against the world, one begins to see oneself as an expression of the same reality that produces everything else. The boundaries between self and nature soften. Acceptance replaces resistance. And from this point, his philosophy begins to explore how knowledge itself works, how the human mind understands reality, and why some forms of knowledge lead to confusion while others lead to genuine freedom. Spinoza believed that if human freedom depends on understanding reality, then the next question becomes very important. How do humans actually know anything? Why do people misunderstand the world so often even though they live inside it every moment? To answer this, Spinoza carefully examined the different ways the human mind forms knowledge. He explained that not all knowledge is equal. Some kinds of knowing trap people in emotional instability, while other kinds gradually bring calmness and independence. According to Spinoza, most suffering begins with the lowest form of knowledge, which he called imagination. Imagination is the way humans normally experience life. It comes from sensory experience, memories, hearsay, and incomplete observations. A person sees events happen and immediately forms conclusions without understanding deeper causes. For example, Someone may believe luck controls success because they notice outcomes but do not understand the hidden processes behind them. Another person may fear someone simply because of a past association rather than present reality. In imagination, the mind connects ideas loosely. Images replace understanding. People react to appearances rather than necessity. Because imagination depends heavily on personal experience, it easily produces superstition, prejudice, and emotional instability. Spinoza believed organized fear-based religion often grows from imagination because humans project human emotions onto nature and assume events happen for reward or punishment. When storms destroy crops or illness spreads, people imagine intention behind events. They assume someone or something must be angry or testing them. Spinoza argued this happens because humans naturally interpret everything through human purposes. People believe rain exists for crops or animals exist for human use simply because these things benefit them. This habit leads humans to believe the entire universe was designed with human goals in mind. Spinoza rejected this completely. Nature has no final purpose aimed at human comfort. Events occur through causal necessity, not intention. Once people understand this, fear begins to weaken because unpredictable events are no longer seen as personal judgments. Above imagination lies the second form of knowledge, which Spinoza called reason. Reason does not depend on isolated experiences, but on recognizing patterns that must always be true. Through reason, humans understand relationships and laws that apply universally. Mathematics becomes an example because its truths do not change based on opinion or circumstance. When reasoning develops, a person begins to understand common features shared by all things in nature. They recognize that all bodies follow physical laws and all minds follow logical structure. This understanding produces stability because reason connects ideas through necessity rather than accident. Reason changes emotional life in a powerful way. When someone understands why events occur, emotional reactions become moderated. Anger fades when causes become visible. Fear reduces when uncertainty decreases. Instead of being pushed by every external event, the mind begins acting from internal understanding. Spinoza believed rational understanding naturally encourages cooperation between people. Since humans share the same fundamental nature and strive for preservation, reason reveals that helping others strengthens oneself. Conflict driven by envy or pride appears irrational because it weakens collective stability. Yet Spinoza did not believe reason was the highest human achievement. Beyond reason exists a third and rare form of knowledge, which he called intuitive knowledge. This form does not move step by step through argument. Instead, it grasps reality directly by understanding how individual things follow from the infinite nature of existence itself. In intuitive knowledge, the mind perceives each thing as an expression of the whole of nature. Instead of seeing separate events, one understands how everything follows from the same underlying reality. This produces a profound sense of unity. The individual no longer feels isolated or opposed to the world. From this understanding arises what Spinoza described as intellectual love of God. This love is not emotional dependence, but joyful recognition of participation in infinite existence. The mind experiences peace because it understands that everything unfolds according to necessity and that it belongs fully within this order. Spinoza believed this understanding transforms how humans experience time and mortality. Normally, people fear loss because they identify completely with temporary experiences. But when the mind understands eternal truths, part of human awareness connects with something timeless. Knowledge itself reflects the eternal structure of nature. This does not mean personal immortality in a traditional sense. Spinoza did not claim the personality survives death. Instead, he argued that the more the mind understands reality through reason and intuition, the more it participates in eternal truth rather than temporary imagination. Wisdom becomes a kind of permanence grounded in understanding rather than duration. Spinoza's philosophy, therefore, turns ethics into psychology. Moral improvement does not come from obeying commands or suppressing desire. It comes from increasing adequate knowledge. As understanding grows, harmful emotions naturally lose strength because their causes become clear. He explained that emotions follow precise laws, just like physical motion. Love arises when something increases our power to exist. Sadness arises when that power decreases. Hatred develops when sadness becomes associated with an external cause. By studying these emotional mechanisms, individuals gain the ability to transform them. For example, resentment persists when a person repeatedly imagines injury without understanding causes. But if understanding replaces imagination, emotional energy changes direction. The person moves from passive suffering toward active comprehension. Spinoza emphasized that self-control does not mean destroying emotion. Humans cannot eliminate feelings because emotions belong to nature itself. True strength lies in reorganizing emotional life through understanding. Reason guides desire rather than fighting it. A rational person, therefore, does not reject pleasure, but seeks pleasures that genuinely strengthen life. Temporary excitement that leads to long-term weakness becomes irrational. Stable joy grounded in understanding becomes desirable. Happiness becomes linked with increased capacity to think and act clearly. Spinoza also redefined virtue. Virtue is not sacrifice against one's nature. Virtue is acting according to one's true nature understood through reason. The more a person acts from understanding, the more powerful and free they become. Weakness comes from confusion and external domination. This view removes guilt as a central moral force. Instead of condemning oneself for emotional reactions, one studies them. Understanding replaces moral self-punishment. Growth becomes intellectual rather than judgmental. Spinoza imagined a human life gradually moving from emotional chaos toward clarity. At first, people are driven by external circumstances, praise, fear, ambition, and social comparison. Slowly through knowledge, they recognize patterns behind experience. Eventually, understanding produces inner steadiness independent of external fluctuation. At this stage, a person begins living less through reaction and more through comprehension. They accept necessity without resignation because understanding reveals participation rather than helplessness. Acceptance becomes active alignment with reality. From here, Spinoza begins examining how individuals living according to reason relate to society, politics, and other human beings, and why collective life becomes essential for human flourishing within the natural order. For Spinoza, understanding reality and mastering emotions does not lead a person away from society. It leads deeper into it. Human beings are not meant to live alone because isolation weakens their power to exist. Since every individual strives to preserve and strengthen their existence, cooperation becomes not merely a moral suggestion, but a rational necessity. Spinoza observed that a single human being is fragile. Alone, a person struggles against danger, scarcity, and uncertainty. But when individuals live together under shared understanding, their collective power increases. Knowledge grows faster, safety improves, and emotional stability becomes easier to maintain. From this insight, Spinoza built his view of politics and society. He rejected the idea that humans are naturally sinful or corrupt creatures needing strict domination. Instead, he believed humans are naturally driven by desire and emotion, and conflict arises mainly from ignorance rather than evil intention. People harm one another because they misunderstand what truly benefits them. When guided only by imagination, individuals chase power, status, or revenge, believing these will secure happiness. Yet these pursuits often produce insecurity and conflict. Reason reveals something different. A rational person understands that other humans are not obstacles, but allies in survival. Supporting others strengthens the conditions necessary for one's own flourishing. Justice, therefore, emerges not from divine command, but from rational self-interest properly understood. Spinoza argued that societies form because individuals recognize that cooperation protects their ability to live and think freely. Laws are created not to suppress human nature, but to manage emotional conflict so people can safely pursue understanding. The purpose of political organization is stability that allows intellectual and emotional development. He believed the best society is one that maximizes freedom of thought. Since understanding leads to peace, suppressing ideas only increases ignorance and emotional unrest. When authorities attempt to control belief, fear replaces reason and society becomes unstable. Spinoza saw freedom of thinking as essential because truth does not threaten social order. Ignorance does. This position was extremely bold for his time. Many believed unity required enforced belief. Spinoza instead claimed genuine unity arises when individuals are allowed to think openly while agreeing to follow common laws for mutual benefit. Obedience to law becomes rational when laws protect collective flourishing rather than personal domination. Spinoza distinguished between external obedience and internal freedom. A person may follow social rules while remaining intellectually free. True freedom exists in thought and understanding, not in escaping all structure. Even within society governed by laws, individuals can achieve philosophical freedom through knowledge. He also examined power carefully. Power for Spinoza does not mean control over others. Real power means the ability to act according to one's nature through understanding. Someone ruled by anger or fear may appear powerful but is internally unstable. A calm, rational person possesses greater power because actions arise from clarity rather than reaction. This idea transforms how success is understood. Social admiration, wealth, or authority do not guarantee strength. If these depend on external approval, they create vulnerability. The person becomes emotionally dependent on unstable conditions. Rational independence provides deeper security because it rests on understanding rather than circumstance. Spinoza believed emotions spread between people almost like physical motion. Fear creates fear. Anger produces anger. But calm reasoning can also spread stability. Communities shaped by understanding gradually reduce destructive passions. Education, therefore, becomes central to ethical society, not as moral instruction, but as cultivation of understanding. He emphasized that humans naturally imitate emotions they observe in others. This explains why crowds can become violent or compassionate, depending on shared feeling. Political leaders who manipulate fear strengthen instability, while those encouraging rational cooperation strengthen collective power. Spinoza's ethical individual, therefore, seeks friendships grounded in mutual understanding. Friendship becomes one of the highest human goods because shared reasoning increases joy and intellectual growth. Loving others rationally does not mean emotional detachment. It means wishing for others to become stronger and more understanding because their flourishing supports one's own. Hatred, revenge, and envy appear irrational within this framework. These emotions reduce both personal and collective strength. Even when someone causes harm, responding purely through hatred traps the mind in passive emotion. Understanding causes allows constructive response rather than endless emotional bondage. Spinoza did not expect humans to become perfectly rational. He understood imagination and emotion will always exist. The goal is gradual improvement. As understanding increases, destructive passions lose dominance. Life becomes guided more often by active emotions rooted in knowledge. He also addressed religion within society. Spinoza believed religious traditions could promote ethical behavior when they encouraged justice and compassion. However, problems arise when religion promotes fear or claims authority over thought. True spirituality, in his view, lies in understanding nature and living rationally rather than performing rituals driven by superstition. For Spinoza, devotion to truth replaces obedience to mystery. The more people understand the natural order, the more they experience reverence toward existence itself. This reverence does not divide humanity into believers and non-believers, but unites everyone within the same reality. As individuals grow in understanding, their relationship with fortune changes. Success and failure no longer produce extreme emotional swings. Since everything follows necessity, events are understood rather than personally resented. Acceptance becomes strength rather than resignation. Spinoza described the rational person as someone who meets life with steady mind. They enjoy pleasure without addiction and endure difficulty without despair. They act thoughtfully instead of impulsively. Their peace does not depend entirely on external outcomes because understanding provides internal stability. Such a person still participates fully in life. They form relationships, work within society, and pursue goals. The difference lies in orientation. Actions arise from comprehension rather than emotional compulsion. Joy becomes quieter but more durable. At this stage, Spinoza's philosophy approaches its deepest transformation. The individual who understands nature, emotions, knowledge, and society begins to experience existence itself differently. Life is no longer seen as a struggle against fate, but as participation in an infinite, unfolding order. From here, Spinoza moves toward explaining the highest form of human fulfillment, where understanding reality produces lasting peace, and where the human mind recognizes its place within eternity itself. As Spinoza brings his philosophy toward its highest point, everything he has explained begins to unite into a single vision of human life. Reality is one infinite substance. Every being follows natural necessity. Human emotions arise from understandable causes. Knowledge transforms suffering into clarity. Society flourishes through rational cooperation. All of these ideas now lead toward one final question. What does it mean to live well once reality is truly understood? Spinoza believed that most people move through life in a condition he described as bondage. This bondage does not come from external chains, but from emotional dependence. A person becomes controlled by hope, fear, pride, regret, or desire for approval. Their happiness rises and falls according to events they cannot fully control. Even moments of pleasure contain anxiety because loss always remains possible. The person living through imagination constantly compares past and future. They regret what cannot be changed and fear what has not yet arrived. Because they misunderstand causes, they blame themselves or others absolutely. Life feels unstable because emotional life depends on unpredictable circumstances. Freedom begins gradually when understanding replaces confusion. Spinoza did not imagine a sudden enlightenment. Instead, freedom grows step by step as the mind forms adequate ideas about reality. Each moment of genuine understanding weakens passive emotion and strengthens active awareness. When someone understands why anger arises, anger loses part of its force. When jealousy is seen as fear of diminished power rather than moral failure, it becomes manageable. Understanding turns emotional storms into observable processes. The individual no longer feels completely overwhelmed because emotions are recognized as natural events rather than mysterious attacks. Spinoza believed this transformation produces joy, not excitement or temporary pleasure, but a stable increase in one's power to exist and act. Joy signals alignment with reality. Sadness signals reduction of that power. Ethical living, therefore, becomes the cultivation of conditions that support lasting joy through understanding. At this stage, the individual begins living according to reason more consistently. Decisions are guided by long-term, flourishing rather than immediate impulse. Relationships become less possessive because others are no longer viewed as objects of control. Love becomes appreciation of another person's existence and growth. Spinoza described rational love as wishing others strength and understanding without dependence on ownership or domination. Since every individual expresses the same infinite nature, recognizing another person's flourishing becomes a form of self-affirmation. cooperation feels natural rather than forced. The fear of death also changes under this understanding. Spinoza argued that fear of death dominates human behavior because people identify completely with temporary experiences and imagine futures. But the rational mind focuses on understanding rather than duration. A wise person thinks about living well instead of fearing inevitable endings. He explained that the human mind participates in eternity whenever it understands eternal truths. Mathematical insight does not expire with time. Understanding natural laws connects the mind with structures that are not limited to individual lifespan. In knowing reality clearly, the mind experiences something timeless within present awareness. This leads to Spinoza's highest concept, the intellectual love of God. This love is the joyful awareness that one is part of infinite nature understanding itself. The mind recognizes that its ability to know reality is itself an expression of the same reality it studies. Observer and universe are no longer felt as separate. In this state, resentment toward fate disappears. Events are no longer interpreted as personal injustice. Everything follows from necessity within the total order of existence. Acceptance emerges not from resignation, but from comprehension. One understands that reality could not unfold differently from its nature. Spinoza believed this understanding produces deep peace. Emotional turbulence decreases because expectations align with necessity. Gratitude replaces complaint. Even difficulty becomes intelligible rather than meaningless. The individual remains active in life, yet internally stable. This peace does not remove human emotion. Joy, sadness, love, and desire continue to exist. The difference lies in proportion. Active emotions, guided by understanding, dominate passive reactions. The person becomes less controlled by external forces and more guided by insight. Spinoza described this condition as blessedness. It is not a reward granted after moral struggle, but the natural result of understanding reality clearly. Happiness is identical with wisdom. To know truly is already to live well. Importantly, this state remains human rather than perfect. Spinoza never imagined escape from nature. Humans remain finite beings influenced by countless causes. Moments of confusion still arise, yet increased understanding allows quicker return to balance. Life becomes a continuous practice of comprehension rather than conflict. Through this philosophy, ethics, psychology, metaphysics, and politics merge into one system. Understanding reality leads to emotional freedom. Emotional freedom supports rational cooperation. Rational cooperation strengthens society. Society allows further growth of understanding. The individual and the whole develop together. To think like Spinoza ultimately means seeing oneself not as an isolated self struggling against the world, but as a mode of nature expressing itself for a brief moment. Every thought, action, and experience belongs to the same unfolding order that produces stars and oceans. Nothing stands outside this unity. From this perspective, envy loses meaning because each being expresses reality differently. Hatred weakens because others act through causes just as we do. Fear softens because events follow intelligible necessity. Gratitude increases because existence itself becomes worthy of appreciation. Spinoza's master idea can be felt simply. The more clearly one understands reality, the more peaceful and powerful one becomes. Freedom is understanding. Virtue is understanding. Happiness is understanding. In an understanding nature, the human mind comes to rest within it, no longer resisting the flow of existence, but participating consciously in the infinite order from which everything arises and to which everything belongs.